Hi guys, welcome to another episode. Today my guest is Josh Schachnow. Josh is a founder and a CEO at Visto. He's also immigration lawyer. He's also run his own podcast, and he's very active in a clubhouse as well. Welcome to the podcast, Josh. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me, Gurmeet. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. First of all, congratulations on your 50 episode of your podcast. I just saw your site. You completed the 50 episode on a podcast. How has that been experience?
It's been a lot of fun, to be honest. I mean, I started my podcast, I think like 3 years ago now. I don't even remember.
Mm-hmm.
And I've spoken to a lot of more kind of like solopreneur entrepreneurs
Mm-hmm.
type folks, similar to what you do. And I've just found it to be an incredible learning experience
Mm-hmm.
and, learning a lot and meeting really cool people. So I highly recommend it, right? For anybody who's thinking about it or has wanted to do one. I think it's never been easier. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that you have nothing to lose other than spending your time. And I think the benefits far outweigh the, any costs associated.
Yeah, I think one of the item I underestimated that how much learning is in for me. Not a researching other people talking to, but there's so much room to learn and grow from this experience. Think good stuff. So tell us a little
Absolutely.
bit about your your organization Westo. What do you guys do, and what's the concept behind it, and how do you get started with it?
Yeah, so as you mentioned earlier, I'm a Canadian immigration lawyer by trade, and I spent, the first few years of my practice doing immigration law, right? Filling out
Mm-hmm.
paperwork and helping people and helping companies. I was working with a lot of tech companies in Canada, bringing engineers and other forms of tech workers into Canada. And I noticed that number one, there was no tech companies building anything in the immigration space. And number
Mm-hmm.
two, filling out the same forms over and over again started getting really boring.
Mm-hmm.
So about a year and a half ago, I co-founded Visto. You can check us out at visto.ai.
Mm-hmm.
And we do two things. So firstly, we help prospective immigrants understand and navigate the Canadian immigration process, right? It can
Yeah.
be very confusing. It can be very expensive to get started. Some lawyers or consultants will charge hundreds of dollars just to get on the phone with you. With Visto, you can create a free account. You can learn all the basics about Canadian immigration for free. And then we
Mm-hmm.
have some, services. If you want to work with our legal team, if you want to use some of our tools or technology, then there are optional paid services as well. At the same time, we've also built some tools that enable immigration practitioners, so immigration lawyers, immigration consultants, to use some of our software to save time, make more money, and grow their own businesses. So we're kind of working twofold, a little bit B2C, a little bit B2B as well at the same time.
Interesting. So is it for certain countries, Josh, or is it global? How do you guys capture, every country has a different requirements to come to Canada. How do you guys capture all the requirement from different countries? How does that work? The logic behind it?
Yeah, so in terms of immigrating to Canada, in depending on the program, a lot of the requirements are the same. So for
Mm-hmm.
example, a permanent residence program like Express Entry, 98% of the requirements are the same. Doesn't really matter what country you're coming from if you're outside of Canada.
Yeah.
Some of the other programs, study permit, work permit, those can be a little bit different depending on what country, but I'd say about 80 to 90% of the forms, of the documents are all the same. There might
Mm-hmm.
just be an extra 10, 15, 20% that are slightly different, or extra requirements depending on the country that you're applying from. So
Mm-hmm.
either way, you can learn all the basics, right? A lot of, I'd say a common misconception is, and I hear this all the time when I do consultations, is, hey, Josh, I'm from this country. How does it work from this country?
Mm-hmm.
And what most people don't realize is it's pretty much the same from wherever country you're coming from,
I
if
see.
the end destination is the same. In
Mm-hmm.
terms of our B2B software, it services those selling services into Canada. So
Okay.
that's been interesting, trying to sell to immigration service providers in different countries, but all selling the same services to Canada.
Mm-hmm.
I'm definitely learning pretty quickly that business is done a little bit differently in different countries around the world, which kind of
Mm-hmm.
makes it fun, right? I mean, it's you're constantly having to adjust and amend strategies based off of what might work or might not work in different countries around the world.
Mhm. So if you can talk about a little bit about a business standpoint, Josh, what kind of businesses were, bringing, overseas, tax or any skill set from overseas before COVID, and how does that change during the COVID? And what do you see that they're looking for, forward after COVID? Is it still, there's opportunity still there? How people are looking at those?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I've spent most of my career working on is a program called the Global Talent Stream, which is basically an expedited work permit for tech workers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Software developers, web developers, engineers, data scientists, et cetera, et cetera. The government created this program to help tech companies or people employing tech workers to bring them over quickly because of the need, right? I mean, especially if you're in the a high growth tech sector, if you can't hire a big enough team within 6 months, you might go under, right? So, these are the terms we're kind of talking about. Now, in terms of companies I've worked with high growth tech companies, based out of Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, et cetera. I've worked with more traditional service-based, dev shops or recruitment companies, staffing companies that would bring in tech workers so that they could place them as consultants in other companies around the country. So what's most important is the type of talent. If you're trying to bring in technical talent, the type of business almost doesn't really matter. It may affect the application a little bit, but if you are looking to bring in tech workers for almost any number of reasons, you can bring them in through this one program. I'd say the biggest effect due to COVID is, number one, demand has just gone down a little bit, right? So there's just fewer companies that kind of need to or want to hire. And number two, the work permit processing times have gone up a little bit. So whereas pre-COVID, you would get your LMIA and your work permit within about 4 to 6 weeks to bring the worker over. We're still seeing LMIA applications take about 2 weeks, but the work permit processing is taking a little bit longer, especially depending on what country the applicant is applying from.
I see. Toronto being a tech hub for a lot of the new startups or new companies, for the last couple of years. How big is what do you see the footprint of how many companies trying to bring people from overseas versus how many locally Canadian companies are grown. Where do you see that is that the go-to kind of approach that, hey, listen, if I'm a growing company, I need to bring people in, or are they trying to do promote in-house skill set or local skill set here?
Yeah, it really depends on the company from what I've seen, right? I've seen all types of companies be willing to sponsor, aka bring in foreign talent. And I've seen all kinds of companies be completely against it, right? If anything, I think it more has to do with management and what their insight is, right? So for example, and the reason for it is simply supply and demand, right? Because of the tech industry in general, a lot of the big US tech companies have opened up shops in Canada, right? I mean, if you walk downtown Toronto, you're going to see the Shopify's, Shopify naturally because it's Canada born, but Amazon, LinkedIn, Facebook, Google, they all have offices here. Yeah. In fact, they're opening up multiple offices. So that's just driven up demand for tech talent, and the domestic supply is just simply shrunk. Salaries go up. It's harder to find them. So there's a mix of, companies who say a few things. Number one, there's just not enough talent here. Number two, it's just more expensive here. Number three, it's harder to retain them here, right? Because even if you, and we all know how hard it is to, do one successful tech hire, right? You want to find someone who's skilled enough, who's got the right community. You and I were talking about this a week or two ago, right? Communication skills, business acumen, et cetera, et cetera. You find that person. Okay, great. You hire a Canadian citizen or a PR. What if the next week Google offers them double the salary or an extra 50K, or Facebook offers them an extra 50K, or Google wants them down in New York or California for double the salary in US dollars, right? So that's one aspect. And what a lot of companies have realized is if you are looking outside of the country, especially in certain countries, that where there's a proclivity to wanting to leave the country and come to Canada, there's no competition, right? So I did a lot of work permits from India, from Brazil, from China. If you're, giving a job offer to someone in India and you're offering them a very good, competitive Canadian salary, because there is a minimum wage that you have to offer by law. you're not competing with any Canadian companies now, right? Because people abroad are not getting dozens of job offers from outside of their own country, right? It's a very difficult process. So now we're talking about, you're not competing with anybody. You can naturally get them for a little bit below market rate, right? I'm not saying anybody should take advantage of anybody or underpay anybody. It's actually baked into the program where you have to meet a minimum wage. Otherwise, you're not allowed to even sponsor the person.
I see.
And you're giving them a new life, right? You're allowing individuals or families, because in these types of applications, you can always include your spouse or common law partner as well as dependent children. You're giving people a new life, new, career growth, a good salary in a great country, and you're not competing with anybody for it, right? So in fact, if you go through the work permit process, they can only work for your company, right? So now the competition is virtually impossible, right? Unless a new company wants to re-sponsor them on another work permit, which companies are much less likely to do. So I think it's underrated, right? If you have any size company and you need tech workers and you're struggling to find them, or you're struggling with competition, I think it's extraordinarily underrated. The cost savings, the time, it might take a little bit more time upfront to get the visa, but in terms of long-term cost savings, it can be huge.
I assume that, looking at that, on the skill set globally, India probably has a big labor pool to, bring people over, and China is another one. Just considering these couple of countries, how big is a soft skill gap? The way we run our businesses in Canada, do you see companies bringing people over, they put them through a lot of soft skill training or communication training? How big is that gap, you think, before you can put these people to, in front of customers or provide customer service in any form?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it really depends on the country and then on the individual. So for example, China and India are two massive countries, right? They both have similar levels of population, but there are some big differences. There's a reason why Indian citizens make up the majority of immigrants coming to Canada, and why China is nowhere close. And there's a few reasons, one of them being English language skills. So in most of India, or in a lot of India, if you're going to some of the more popular high schools and universities, they're all in English, right? So now you're talking about people, especially even when they graduate and they're working for big companies, some of which are branches of US companies or have North American companies, and the companies operate in English. China, it doesn't seem to be as common to do all of your education in English. And so on average, again, I don't want to make sweeping generalizations here, but just from what I've seen, and the numbers show it, right? If you look at the Immigration Canada data, it will support this, that there are plenty more people coming to Canada from a country like India, largely due to English language skills, and also just the desire to leave and settle in Canada, right? I don't want to get into politics and governments and stuff like that, right? But Chinese tend to be more interested in staying in their home country, which, everybody's a free person. And people in India tend to be more interested in leaving and coming to North America for however long or for whatever reason. Now, in terms of putting them in front of North American clients, it kind of depends, right? I mean, if you can find someone from any country, right? India, China, Brazil, a lot of these workers are extremely good with English language, right? They can speak the language, no problem. Whether you want to stick them in front of a client or include them on sales calls, et cetera, that's a whole different story, right? It's going to be different from person to person. It's going to be, what are your expectations? What do you need them to do? How good are they at, how experienced are they, right? Do they have 1 or 2 years out of university? Or, I mean, again, another beautiful thing about sponsoring workers, you can go hire someone with 10, 15, 20 years of technical experience in India, in Brazil, in China, and get them on a rate that's, probably less than someone with 3 years experience as a software engineer in Canada. The good part of that question as well, Gurmeet, is the training. I didn't have as much insight into what companies were doing once they were brought over, right? So I was kind of the immigration middleman, right? You hire someone abroad, we help you get them here as quickly as possible. What they were kind of doing on the ground in the office, I can't say I had as much insight into, but I would say that depending on the type of role that they're in, some sort of hey, here's how business is kind of done in Canada or in specific cities or in North America, might be a good idea in that regard.
Well, that also applies the same for, when you're hiring local, people from within Canada as well. They also need a soft skill training. That gap is always there. You can find very hard skilled people, but you need to train on a soft skill, communication, all this stuff. So you still have to make a commitment to train them, no matter where they're coming from, right? There could be a little bit more commitment they can make from overseas, but it's almost the same. But let's talk about process. So if you're going to hire somebody from overseas, so what does the process look like, Josh? You get to interview these people. How does the interview process works? How you vet those, who you wanna bring over, and is the commitment these people make to you when they come to Canada? How does that work?
Yeah, so the recruitment stuff is really up to you, right? There's no laws in the sense of, anything more than you would have to do in Canada in terms of, you interview and you only hire if you want, right? The government can't kind of force you to hire certain people or do certain things. With the global talent stream, there's no proof of recruitment required. So for certain types of LMIAs, labor market impact assessments, which means, helping you sponsor workers from outside of the country, you typically have to show that you've tried to recruit within Canada for 30 days. With the global talent stream, you don't have to do that because the government's basically said, hey, we understand there's not enough tech workers. You don't have to prove it to us, go hire. You don't have to show recruitment efforts in Canada. So you go through your own process, right? Post on job boards, network, et cetera, put them through interviews. And then eventually, if you're going to give them an offer, what I see happen a lot is an employment agreement that says that it is, dependent on receiving the proper immigration documents, right? Which basically means this starts when you get your work permit approved. Now, some people will start working before, right? Some people can start working remotely depending on, what your needs are as a company. What I saw most often is an employment agreement saying, hey, you're going to come work for us in Canada. Here's your role. Here's your salary, et cetera, if you're able to get a successful work permit. Now, what happens from there, it's really two steps. You have the LMIA application and you have the work permit application. So the LMIA has to be done through the company or on behalf of the company. And this is an application that basically has to prove, hey, we're a Canadian entity. We're selling products or services in Canada. We're legit. We can afford to pay this person for the 2-year work permit period. They are a tech worker. Here's what we do as a business. Please allow us to sponsor this worker. And that has to be submitted on behalf of the company. There's $1,000 government filing fee per employee that you're sponsoring. You can include multiple, right? I've done up to, I think the biggest one I did was 6 or 7 employees at the same time that one company was applying to sponsor at the same time. So that's $1,000 a head just in the government filing fees. And if that's approved, the worker or the worker's lawyer can then take that LMI approval and apply for their work permit. And that is more individual specific, right? So they're filling out the immigration forms, the resume, the bachelor, copy of their education and proof of employment, et cetera. You're submitting that to Immigration Canada, and Immigration Canada is evaluating the individual on, are they allowed to enter the country on a work permit? They get the work permit through the global talent stream specifically. It's given for a maximum of 2 years, at which point they can only work for your company, right? These are what we call closed work permits, meaning as long as they're only on that work permit, they can only work for your company. So until they get PR or if a new company sponsors them for a new permit, if none of those happen, they can only work for your company, which, is kind of nice from an employer standpoint, right? So yeah, that's kind of those are the basics.
So what happens that you bring people from overseas, Josh, and with what's going on with the pandemic, if you have to scale down with in your workforce or you have to scale up, well, scale up is easy, you bring more people, but if you have to scale down for a short time, either you have to realign your company. What happens if you have to cut some, workforce in your company? What happens in that case?
Yeah, so I think what you're asking is, if you have to fire them, what happens, right? And it happens, right? So let's say you sponsor someone on a 2-year work permit and for whatever reason, COVID, or you don't like them, or they're not good at their job, whatever, a wide variety of reasons, you let them go after 6 months. Unlike, some permits in the US, a lot of these permits are not actually based on maintaining the employment, meaning if you get fired or if the worker quits, they don't have to immediately leave the country. They can stay in Canada for the length of that work permit, actually, but they can't work, right? So usually what happens is if you get fired, the first thing that the worker wants to do is find a new job, right? So that a new company can sponsor them, or, they would try to apply for PR so that they can regain work status. Otherwise, the only thing that they can do is work for your company. But if they're fired, they obviously can't do that. So it happens. I'm sure with COVID especially, it happened even more so than usual. They can go home, home to their home country. It's obviously dependent. But yeah, I mean, most of the regular employment laws apply, right? Hiring, firing, recruitment efforts and stuff like that are relatively similar.
I see. So this is primarily for tech companies, Josh. How about other businesses, right? I know a lot of business leaders right now, as COVID, everybody's getting a vaccine, everybody's thinking, how they're going to get back to the revenue level. Everybody's struggling to build the plans, how they're going to get back. There's no silver bullet, but I know everybody's, looking at ways how to get there. So what would you, recommend for those businesses, who are looking at, I need to scale up, but I need to keep my costs under control on a payroll side? Or what would you recommend that what these people can start planning and how they can approach if there's options in the immigration side? Should they also be looking into that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say especially if you're struggling to hire and keep talent, I would always keep immigration as a secret weapon in your back pocket, right? So the other thing you can think about is it can be used beneficially if you don't need people right now and you have let's say you're in the type of business where you can see your deal flow for the next 3 months or 6 months or 12 months. And maybe you see in 3 to 6 months from now, you're going to hit a spike and you're going to need people, right? Because the reality is with something like GTS, you're probably going to want to give yourself a couple months and you might be pleasantly surprised and get the work permit within a month or two, and you might not. If you're not hiring tech workers, the process will take a little bit longer. Depending on the type of work permit, it will likely take longer if you have to go through the regular LMIA process where it's 30 days of recruitment, then you can submit and you're not benefiting from a 14-day processing time. So that's probably more a 3 to 6 month lead time, right? So maybe in the summer you're busy, right? So 6 months before the summer, you can start kind of recruitment efforts. But the other thing you want to keep in mind, obviously we're working with real people here, right? So if it's a delicate point in time for your business and you don't think you can sustain this level of talent, then maybe you don't want to, maybe you don't want to sponsor at this time, right? Because if you sponsor 1, 2, 3 workers and then 10 months from now, you don't need them anymore, you're putting them in a not so great position if you have to fire them. That being said, business is business and they might actually be better off in Canada than back in their home country. It depends, obviously, on a variety of factors. So I would say, a lot of companies don't even know it's an option, right? So whether you want to sponsor someone today or maybe down the road, educate yourself. An episode like this will hopefully uncover the basics so people just know what is an LMIA, what is a work permit, how does it work, what are the timelines, and then at the time that is right for your business, especially if you're looking to do some scaling and you're frustrated with the supply or level of talent in Canada, there's 8 billion people around the world, right? A large percentage of them would love to live in Canada. So, keep that in your back pocket.
I see. Do you, does that also get checks and balances against that employment rates, rates in Canada versus, how many people you're bringing overseas? If your employment rate is higher in Canada, unemployment rate is higher in Canada, do they say that, okay, we have a higher unemployment rate, you cannot go overseas and, bring people over because we have to, keep the positions here?
I haven't seen that from a countrywide type thing where they, like a program like GTS is going to be around for a while because of the shortage of tech talent, right? It's just, we still, even throughout COVID, right? Like the Slacks and the Zooms of the world, the Shopifys of the world did not have a bad year, right? In fact, they're probably hiring more so than ever before. So I don't know how, when you submit an LMIA, that's actually processed from an organization called the ESDC, Employment and Social Development Canada. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if they have like internal instructions on like, hey, be stricter on LMIAs because unemployment rates are up. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea. The only time I've seen limitations put on, most of my experience is through Global Talent Stream, right? So I don't have much experience with the traditional LMIAs,
I
but I have a
see.
lot of experience with the Global Talent Stream LMIAs. And
Mm-hmm.
the only problem that I saw a company run into is when they were up into the double digits of workers they were sponsoring. And
Okay.
the ESDC was concerned that too much of a proportion of their company was now temporary foreign workers,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they were saying, they'd been approved for 10 plus workers already, and they were applying to sponsor more of them. And the ESDC was basically saying, we're not going to let you sponsor any more workers at this point until you hire a few more Canadian PRs or citizens
I see.
first. And
Okay.
so that was kind of the check and balance done more on a company by company basis and
Mm-hmm.
more based on the volume that that company specifically has done.
I see. Okay. If you can think of a couple other industries where this could be great benefit, Josh. I know tech industry is one where there's we just don't have enough skill set. I wish our kids in Canada, they were taking more computer science or software engineering courses, but that's not the case. I can't even tell my son to go take the courses, right? Um, so that just I'm not sure where the gap is, but Canadian kids, generally speaking, don't want to go to computer science or software development courses. They'd rather take something else. But it's very popular in overseas. So tech skills, I understand. But how about couple other industries, if you can think of where this could be great asset for the business leaders to keep that on arsenal. So listen, let's keep that in the back pocket, and we can use that whenever we need it. Where you think is the manufacturing is one of them, is that restaurants that hit hard. Are they another industry they can use? Where you, if you can think of a few industries.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a few others that have kind of different immigration programs that target them because they are industries that have struggled historically to kind of find and keep talent. One of
Mm-hmm.
them is, which is more fitting now so than ever, is healthcare, right? So
Yeah.
things like nurses, physicians, heck, probably even doctors, anything related to healthcare. I don't want to go too deep on PNP's, provincial nominee programs, because I mean, we could do a whole podcast episode on that, and I don't want to bore people with, legal
Mm-hmm.
mumbo jumbo. But
Yeah.
there are a number of PNPs, so different provinces across the country that have programs just for healthcare workers.
Yeah.
That's one. Hospitality as well. Now, hospitality is kind of iffy right now, right? Because, for example, if you're a hotel, you're probably not doing too well to begin with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe dine-in restaurants aren't doing too well, but I've heard in terms of like chefs and cooks and waiters and waitresses, especially pre-COVID,
Mm-hmm.
there's been a lot of struggle for stuff like that. Hotel cleaning, stuff like that. I've seen a lot of use cases where you rely on foreign talent to fill those kind of roles. A
Mm-hmm.
few others, especially that have PNP or other PR programs, is trucking. Long
Yeah.
haul trucking is apparently in very much demand in Canada. And the last one, which I didn't really realize until a few years ago, and I saw some of the numbers released by IRCC, is farming. So if
Mm-hmm.
there's, I don't know how many of your listeners are in the farming industry or own farms or anything like that, but
Yeah.
actually in 2020, there were more farmers brought in through work permits than there were tech workers, just because of,
Wow.
you say none of my generation and younger wants to go do software development and engineering. We definitely don't want to go work in farms, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's another huge area where there's an extreme lack of demand. There's
Mm-hmm.
specific work permit programs for seasonal agricultural workers in the farming industry.
Yeah, and the areas industry you mentioned, they are the hardest hit during the COVID anyway. Look at what we're doing. We have a shortage of nurses in Ontario, and we can't keep up with the beds, but at the same time, we can't keep up with the nurses. And the government trying to bring them from different provinces to keep
Mm-hmm.
up with the demand. They definitely looks like there's opportunity they can use some of that help. Okay.
Absolutely.
Good
Absolutely.
stuff. Any other thoughts? Businesses are planning to, scale up right after the COVID. They're planning, can they do something now? While we're still going through the vaccination, the time is going to be later, but can they do something now to prepare themselves? When the COVID, almost when we start going back to offices, they can scale up easily, anything they can do now instead of just planning for the future.
Yeah, and that's something we're talking about too, right? Because every industry is going to be affected in one way or another as things open up. I mean, thankfully, immigration will definitely benefit in a positive way, right? I mean, probably most industries will, to be honest. Maybe not Zoom, but who knows? So, I mean, what we're doing is what I kind of like to describe as laying the groundwork, right? We know maybe the floodgates don't open from 0 to 100, but floodgates in a variety of industries are slowly going to start opening up. And so we want to be at the forefront of people's minds when that happens for what we do, which is immigration, right? So what I recommend is doing things like, maybe you don't have an in-depth kind of like sales or outbound strategy right now, but what you probably should be doing is having a really good content marketing or digital marketing strategy to start attracting more audience members, right? Just more people who are aware of your business, consuming your content, building trust with you, starting, growing relationships, right? This is obviously going to be a little bit different depending on what industry you're in. But for, in our business, we want to be the one-stop shop for people to go for immigration news. So we're starting to, more social media content, newsletters, videos, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of people may, especially permanent residents, can't really travel right now. But when the floodgates open, hopefully in the second half of this year, going into 2022, we want to be positioned as a company that people can rely on and trust for those services. Similarly, if you're in IT solutions or, whatever, I'm sure a lot of companies, IT and any part of their budget is down, right? But at some point, it's going to come back up, right? So you need to be the one who's posting content, sending them blog posts, writing blog posts and sharing it with them. So, they're building trust with you. They're getting value from you so that when the time is right, this can go with pretty much any service business is time specific in the sense that a lot of people might not need your service now, but they might need it in 3 months right now. And so you want to be on the top of their mind right then when they need somebody, right? Exactly. So kind of think about that, and maybe that mind shift would help.
So that brings me to another point, Josh. You were mentioning sales and marketing and other areas as well. Let's talk about business process for a second. There's different parts of business process. Where some process where you need a skill set. Some process just are repetitive. A lot about human efforts required. So if I'm looking at a sales process or marketing process, what you just mentioned, or any other process where a lot of repetitive, either person sitting at home in Canada, or I can outsource to a different country because I have a same skill, technology where I can connect with them. Where you see that, if you can name a couple of main differences, but if you think the differences, what should business leaders should be thinking about it? How do they approach that? Do I want to outsource this part of business process to a different country, or do I want to bring a skill set from other country to this country to run that business process? So where the key differences lies in those two?
Yeah, it's a really good thing to think about. I mean, we think about it a lot as business owners and operators. I generally think that there's two ways to outsource things. You can outsource them to people, or you can outsource them to technology. So the first thing that we usually do is, again, this will depend on the type of task, but look if there are tools already out there that can do the thing automatically with relatively easy setup and relatively reasonable costs.
So automation,
exactly. I mean, there's tons of words for it, right? Automation, well, I guess technology technically doesn't have to be, software. But basically what I'm referring to would be software, right? A SaaS, a Zapier, some sort of software that saves my co-founder and I the time of doing the work ourselves. And if we can find an easy tool and it's relatively cheap, that's usually the end of the discussion. And the reason why I like to look to that first is because you don't have to train it, right? I mean, you might have to do there's setup costs and time and resources involved. But generally speaking, if the task is very repetitive, I'd rather go with software because it's very good at doing repetitive stuff over and over and over again, right? It doesn't get bored. It doesn't get sidetracked. It doesn't get an Instagram notification, whatever. Now, if it doesn't fit under that,
Okay.
I mean, we have been working with I use a VA from the Philippines, and she's been incredible. And I've had her do a whole whack of stuff
Mm-hmm.
over the years. And basically, the way I think of outsourcing is, how specialized do I need the work to be? So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, I've used VAs and service providers from outside of Canada for social media. And what
Mm-hmm.
I found over time was, because of the type of content I'm trying to put out, it wasn't I wasn't happy enough with it. And so
Mm-hmm.
now we work with social media providers from inside Canada,
Okay.
because they have my native English. They have a better understanding of our programs and just the
Mm-hmm.
country, right? We post content just about Canada, right? What it's like
Mm-hmm.
living in Canada. And so
Yeah.
having a content creator who's lived and grown up in Canada just makes a lot more sense,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whereas I needed a list scraped for names and phone numbers last week, right? It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter who the heck that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, if I can just save money and get it done as cheaply as possible, I'm going to go with that route. So
Yeah.
when it comes to trading off between inside, outside Canada, what
Mm-hmm.
I would say is, how important is the quality and the customization to it,
Mm-hmm.
and what's the cost, and is it worth it, right?
I see.
Is the cost difference worth it, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's still a huge, in most cases, you're going to save money
Mm-hmm.
outsourcing it to other countries, right? Probably in 99% of cases, right, you can find somebody to do it cheaper in other countries.
Mm-hmm.
How much more added time or energy is it going to take you to get it to perfect or to good enough,
Mm-hmm.
so that, so for example, I was paying, maybe 40% of what I'm paying now for social media content, but it took me that much more time and energy to kind of tweak and change some of the social media to make it more Canada friendly.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's like set and forget, right? I don't have to
Yeah.
worry about it. And so what's your peace of mind worth? What's an extra hour of your time worth? Do
Mm-hmm.
that math.
Mm-hmm.
And it really, it's so case by case. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think, Gurmeet? Do you agree with that, or
Yeah,
what's
yeah,
your
no,
thought process?
we never thought about outsourcing to any country before. You were talking. For us is what we do in a business is soft skills and understanding of people locally here. Business is very critical. Because we deliver custom services to every business. We approach and in terms of business process, I think that repetitive work, where you are doing the same thing over and over, and that makes sense. You can, especially if you're running a shift work and in a different ways. There's areas where it does make sense, where it doesn't. So, but I think I agree with you that if you're going to invest your time on top of that, what you're getting outside, then you have to value your time. What's my time worth? Do I have a time for that? So that's how you approach it. We for us is time is something. We treat that as an asset in our company. How could we automate? We always look for that. Every client we touch, we're simply looking at how many things we can automate. That's the first approach we take. Any piece of software we can buy, hardware we can buy. Our approach has always been automation. How many things can we automate? If we can do
Mm-hmm.
humanly something, could we put a script, or could we automate that piece, right? So we've been successful with the automation piece. Haven't thought about that, taking the business process and moving to different countries, but just the automation has been getting us where we wanted to get.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I don't think, Gurmeet, enough people actually think about what they could save time on and outsource, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
technically, you could have outsourced setting up this call with me to a VA, right?
Yeah.
And it probably, well, I mean, listen, we didn't have a ton of back and forth, but it probably would have saved you 10, 20, I don't know how many minutes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are you researching the people to out, et cetera, right? Hey, find me a list of 50 people I want to talk to. They send you a list. You pick the top 10. Okay, email these people, CC me, set up a phone call. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So how much of that time, how much does that save you time, right?
Exactly.
A lot of admin type tasks are generally ripe for outsourcing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Good stuff. So where can people find you? It looks like what do you take on a Clubhouse before we go? You've been active there. What do you think of it? And what are your thoughts? How do you use it?
Yeah, so I enjoy Clubhouse. I use it weekly, not a ton. I find it can be a rabbit hole, right? I mean, the problem is you could sit on Clubhouse 24/7, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I've kind of taken the moderation approach. So I host an event on Clubhouse every Monday night, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time.
Okay.
And it's just for entrepreneurs to network, talk about business, get some insight on the struggles you're having. We had it last night, 7:30 p.m. And I'm always meeting new people, hearing about, like last night I met a guy who's based out of Japan, who's got this kind of like collaboration marketplace that he's building, which is like super cool, right? Never thought of that in a million years.
Yeah.
And you're just meeting these really awesome people from all over the world. So if you're an entrepreneur, you're looking for feedback, you're looking to network, I think it could be a great tool. I think you got to be careful with it. I have notifications turned off. So I usually go on Monday night for my own event. And then Wednesday night, another friend of mine usually hosts kind of like a tech startup event. I usually attend that. And then maybe once or twice a week, I'll pop in, see if anything, see what's up and if it's worth hopping into any rooms. I think it's super powerful. If you want to do, especially a lot of B2B sales, and you can be smart with the groups that you're joining and the rooms that you're joining, I think it could be extremely valuable. Okay. If you're not doing as much sales or networking, I don't know, just be careful, right? It's like any social media platform, right? It can be a bit of a rabbit hole and you just want to be, I'm doing this every day, right? How am I spending my time and is it as effective as possible? So just like any other tool, apply the same thinking to it.
Yeah, you want to get the, end of the day, we have a limited hours, everybody got the same 24 hours, we're trying to get the most out of the time. You get to see, there's a Clubhouse gives you, what are you trying to get out of from your time?
Exactly.
I played with it a little bit here and there. I haven't used it. I see a lot of mentors, that I connect with there as well. So it's a lot of people on a Clubhouse, a lot of, people, very successful people in a Clubhouse. So I was a little bit surprised, like how many people are using it. I haven't played enough, but I'm not sure if you can take a Clubhouse conversation and turn them into a podcast. I don't know if it goes that far.
I think they have a recording. I think they have a recording feature. I've never used it, but I believe you can turn on recording and record the room. That being so, because I have a podcast as well, I was thinking about recording it there, and then maybe including the Q&A. But from what I've found using it, I find it less prone to, you can do podcasts 100% on Clubhouse. People do it every day. But I find the major benefit is the collaboration, is the communication. So like when I do my event on Monday, if you join the room, I invite you up to speak. You don't have to speak, but everybody gets invited. Everybody gets a chance to introduce themselves, talk about their business, ask for advice if they need help. And I just find that more fun, right? Yeah. Podcast, I like to do off air. Just me and the guest, right? Just like we're doing right now, focus. I don't have to keep an eye on comments. I don't have to think about viewers and muting people and whatever, because then I find it takes away from the value of the conversation. But hey, it can all be done. You should definitely check it out. Spend a bit of time clicking around, because
I will probably attend your event, Josh, this week.
Absolutely.
I'll come and check it out. Good stuff. Where can people find you and how can they connect with you?
Yeah, best place, honestly, is probably LinkedIn. If you just spell my name out, Josh, Schachnow, maybe we'll link to it in the description. You can check out my tech company at visto.ai, visto.ai. You can check out my podcast and some of my blog stuff at solopreneurgrind.com. And that's kind of, business that's me kind of podcasting and talking about my business, weeks. And I have an email list. I send an email every Monday morning talking about my previous week in business, things I'm learning, business books I've read, all that kind of stuff.
What's in for you for 2021, Josh? Anything major, you going towards, or any milestone or goals you have for 2021?
Yeah, we really want to take Visto to the next level. So we're hoping to continue to scale up our B2C and B2B platforms, and aim to do a bigger fundraise in probably the third or fourth quarter of 2021, build out a bigger team, and continue to build more and more immigration software. So that's definitely the big goal for me in 2021. That's the focus.
Beautiful. Good stuff. I learned a lot from Robert. I never looked at immigration the same way you explained. I've always been hesitant. When we started a business, we simply made a commitment that we're going to Canadian-based local people, never going to outsource, but you give me a little, points to think a little bit differently, different perspective. I will definitely encourage people to whoever pushes or they want to get some more details, connect with you. We send these videos to all our contacts, business leaders. So I'm going to include your contact information in an email as well. So they can just, open your website and just connect with you from there as well.
Absolutely. And if it's more on the B2B, if your company is looking to hire talent, definitely check out my law firm as well. So I'm a partner at Murbaha Schachnow LLP. I work with another immigration lawyer because I'm more focused on the tech. She's a little bit more focused on doing the file work. But the two of us work together. Between the two of us, I mean, we've probably done hundreds of GTS applications, LMIAs, that kind of stuff. So I'll flip you that info as well. Murbaha, M&Simmigration.com. And we'll include all that as well.
Good stuff. Beautiful. Thank you so much for your time, Josh. And thank you for sharing the perspective. I learned a lot from you.
Thanks very much, Gurmeet, for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Have a good one.
You too.
Bye-bye.